You say you like meaningful conversations. You say you value honesty. You say you want real connections. But when the moment actually comes, when someone asks you something personal, when the topic starts getting emotional, when silence invites something deeper, you change the subject. You joke. You give a short answer. You look at your phone. You escape. And later, you don't even fully understand why. The real reason you avoid deep conversations isn't because you don't care. It's because depth requires exposure, and exposure feels dangerous. Deep conversations are not just about talking, they're about revealing. When someone asks you what truly scares you, what keeps you up at night, what you regret, what you want but are afraid to admit, you're no longer performing. You're no longer hiding behind personality, humor, intelligence, or confidence. You're just you. And for many people, that feels terrifying. Most of us grew up learning how to present ourselves, not how to express ourselves. We learned what is acceptable to say. We learned which emotions make others uncomfortable. We learned that being too sensitive, too dramatic, or too emotional gets judged. So we built filters, strong filters. Over time, those filters became automatic. Now when a conversation starts going deeper, your nervous system reacts before your mind does. You feel slightly uncomfortable, slightly tense. You don't know why, but you feel the urge to escape. That's not random. That's protection. Deep conversations threaten the image you've carefully built. You've spent years shaping how people see you. Maybe you're the strong one, the funny one, the calm one, the smart one, the stable one. But depth doesn't respect labels. Depth asks, what's behind that? And if you're not fully sure what's behind it yourself, that question feels unsafe. Another reason you avoid deep conversations is because they force you to confront emotions you've been suppressing. Surface talk is safe. It stays in logic. It stays in daily events. But depth moves into feelings. And feelings are messy. Maybe you've trained yourself to stay productive, busy, distracted. Because when you slow down, emotions rise: regret, loneliness, confusion, insecurity, and deep conversations slow you down. They shine a light into places you've been avoiding. So instead of facing those emotions, you avoid the doorway that leads to them. There's also the fear of being misunderstood. When you open up, you lose control over how your words will be interpreted. What if they judge you? What if they think differently of you? What if they use your vulnerability against you later? If you've ever opened up in the past and felt dismissed, ignored, or betrayed, your brain remembers. It stores that memory as a warning. And now, whenever depth approaches, your brain whispers, careful. You don't avoid deep conversations because you're shallow. You avoid them because somewhere in your past, vulnerability didn't feel safe. Another uncomfortable truth is that deep conversations create intimacy, and intimacy is powerful. Once someone sees the real you, the connection changes. You can't go back to pretending, and that level of closeness means they have the ability to affect you emotionally. If you've been hurt before, closeness feels risky. It's easier to stay slightly distant, slightly guarded. Surface-level interactions protect your independence. Depth creates emotional stakes. Sometimes you avoid deep conversations because you're not fully sure what you believe. When someone asks you about your purpose, your fears, your values, your future, you hesitate. Not because you don't care, but because you're still figuring it out. And admitting "I don't know" feels uncomfortable. Surface conversations allow you to stay in control. Deep ones require honesty, and honesty sometimes exposes confusion. There's also ego involved. Deep conversations strip away performance. You can't hide behind achievements or knowledge. You have to talk about doubts, about weaknesses, about moments where you failed. And the ego doesn't like that. It's easier to debate ideas than to admit insecurity. It's easier to discuss news than to discuss trauma. It's easier to analyze others than to analyze yourself. And maybe the biggest reason of all, deep conversations demand presence. In a world full of distractions, depth requires attention. It requires you to sit without checking your phone, without escaping into humor, without multitasking, just sitting with another human being in emotional honesty. That level of presence feels unfamiliar to many people, so they avoid it. You might think you're just not good at emotional talks, but in reality, you were never taught how to feel safe in them. Avoiding deep conversations is not about lacking intelligence. It's about emotional conditioning. And until you understand what you're protecting, you'll keep protecting it automatically. There's something even deeper happening beneath your avoidance. Deep conversations don't just expose emotions, they expose identity. The moment you say something real out loud, it stops being a private thought and becomes part of your reality. And that shift can feel irreversible. If you admit you're unhappy, you can't comfortably pretend anymore. If you admit you feel lonely, you can't keep convincing yourself you prefer being alone. If you admit you're confused about your future, you can't keep performing certainty. Depth forces alignment between what you feel and what you show, and that alignment can be uncomfortable. Sometimes you avoid deep conversations because you fear emotional overwhelm. You know that once you start talking, you might not be able to control what comes out. Maybe there are years of unspoken thoughts sitting inside you. Maybe there's anger you never processed, sadness you buried, disappointment you ignored. And opening one small door feels like it could open everything. So you keep it closed, not because you don't want connection, but because you're afraid of losing control. Control is comforting. Surface conversations give you control. You can choose safe topics. You can manage your tone. You can predict reactions. But depth is unpredictable. You can't script vulnerability. And unpredictability feels unsafe to a nervous system that learned to survive by staying guarded. There's also the fear of rejection. When you show your real thoughts, your real fears, your real insecurities, you risk someone seeing you and deciding you're too much or not enough. And that fear is powerful, because rejection doesn't just hurt your ego, it challenges your sense of belonging. So instead of risking being rejected for who you truly are, you choose to be accepted for a filtered version of yourself. But filtered acceptance always feels slightly empty. Another reason you avoid deep conversations is because they require emotional responsibility. Once you speak honestly, you may need to act honestly. If you admit you're unhappy in a relationship, you might have to address it. If you admit you're unfulfilled in your career, you might have to reconsider your path. If you admit you're hurt by someone's behavior, you might have to confront them. Depth leads to decisions, and decisions lead to change, and change feels heavy. So sometimes, staying silent feels easier than transforming your life. There's also something subtle. Deep conversations demand self-awareness. They require you to understand your own patterns, to recognize your triggers, to articulate your needs. And if you've spent most of your life reacting rather than reflecting, that level of awareness feels unfamiliar. You might not avoid depth because you don't care, you might avoid it because you don't yet fully understand yourself. And it's hard to explain something you haven't processed. Avoiding deep conversations can also become a habit. If you consistently choose humor over honesty, distraction over discussion, busyness over vulnerability, your brain starts associating emotional depth with discomfort. Over time, you automatically shift away from it without even realizing it. It becomes instinctive. But here's the truth. The discomfort you feel during deep conversations is often growth happening in real time. It's emotional muscles stretching, its walls softening, its identity expanding. The tension isn't danger, it's unfamiliarity. You might believe you're protecting yourself, and in some ways you are, but you're also limiting the kind of connection you say you want. Real intimacy, whether friendship, love, or even self-understanding, lives in depth. It lives in those slightly awkward pauses, in those moments when you choose honesty instead of performance, in those sentences that start with "I've never told anyone this, but." Avoiding deep conversations protects you from short-term discomfort, but often creates long-term loneliness. because people can only connect with what you reveal. If you never let them see you beyond the surface, they can't meet you beyond the surface. And maybe the hardest truth is this: you can't expect others to understand you if you don't allow yourself to be understood. The shift doesn't require dramatic confessions. It starts small, staying in the conversation a little longer, answering one question more honestly than usual, admitting, "I don't know," instead of pretending you do, letting silence exist without rushing to fill it. Depth isn't about being emotional all the time. It's about being authentic when it matters. The real reason you avoid deep conversations isn't because you lack depth. It's because depth requires courage. Courage to be seen without guarantees. Courage to speak without rehearsing. Courage to let someone witness your imperfections. And the irony is, the very thing you fear being seen is also the thing that creates real connection. So next time you feel that urge to change the topic when things get real, pause. Notice the discomfort. Ask yourself what you're protecting, and gently challenge it. Because deep conversations don't weaken you. They reveal you. And sometimes, being revealed is exactly what sets you free.